Hey everybody, this is Eric Hux of Hux Racing. The goal here with this video is to compile as much information as I can in the conversion from a manual rack to a depowered power steering rack. In the process of this conversion, I switched to a Spyder pinion at the same time. If you're looking for information on the Spyder pinion, but you're intending on keeping power steering, I recommend looking up Apex Attack. Google Apex Attack, and Mike Reed has a blog detailing his conversion to the Spyder pinion while keeping power steering. My car was already converted to manual steering a good 10 years ago, so I have none of the pump or the reservoir stuff. I wanted a quicker ratio, but I didn't want to just go with a factory power steering ratio. So I did the Spyder pinion at the same time, with the ultimate goal of in the conversion not to have a rack that weighed more than what I previously had. And in the end, I was able to break even just on the rack itself with the other mods that I had done with the housing and the stop and the hardware. But I was also able to get another half a pound out of it by chopping there's some brackets on the back of the front cross member that hold the power steering pump and the power steering reservoir, and I chopped those brackets off of the car. That's what's actually in this bag here. So half a pound and using an air chisel and knocking those brackets off, and then just coming back with a grinder and cleaning that area up. I'm gonna go through it and piece by piece. Really, I just wanted to detail what I had. I'm not gonna have a video showing how I put the rack back together or how I tore it down. I just wanted to show you the mods that I had done while I had it apart. We'll start with the housing. Typically, there would be two ports on the housing, two pressure ports, for right and left. I had welded both of those ports up and then just sanded it smooth. So I deleted the lines that went to the housing. On the rack itself, there would have been a disc here. It was held on by a ring that's kind of behind the disc. You end up just having to destroy this disc to get it off of here. That's what it had separated the right and the left side of the valving. In the process of depowering it, you just delete that disc entirely off of the rack. A lot of people in the pinion housing, they will just go in and just put ports in all these holes here, rubber cap this, port plug all these up. Anybody who watched, sees any of my other posts or my videos or anything, know I'm all about, I hate doing any mods that add weight to a car. I hate, taking a step forward, two steps back. Anytime I add power or add, try to do anything better for the car, I always try to get weight out of it at the same time. It's always a win-win. So in the process, I machined an aluminum housing to replace that cast iron piece, and then I put a standard needle bearing in it. The shaft that's on the pinion is actually just 3/4 of an inch, so I found a 3/4 needle bearing off a McMaster car and machined the housing to accept that. This was the bearing. If anybody wants to go to the extents I've gone to, this is that needle bearing for McMaster car. On the pinion itself, this is what the pinion would have looked like. This is a SW20 pinion. The 3.2 turns lock to lock. This is the valve piece that's on there. We end up removing this piece to depower it. And then these two pieces are actually pressed together, and there's a slight bit of movement, and you can barely feel it in some. Many guys who do this conversion don't do anything about it. They just take that valve piece off, put the whole thing back together. All the Miata videos I've seen in depowering, they weld these two pieces together, and you got to be careful about getting, losing concentricity of the three bearing surfaces. There's still a lower bearing here, the middle bearing, and then the bearing out here on the end of the support. You want to have all those concentric. I'll show you the piece I did. This is the Spyder pinion, and you can see I've welded that together. And if you put the two bearing centers in V-blocks and put your indicator out here, you can see how much run out you have between the three bearing surfaces. I actually had about 7 thousandths, and if you can see the different weld spots on here. If you do a weld in just one spot, it'll actually pull that side tighter together. So say if this part's high, you weld on the high side, and it'll actually pull those up. So just by doing welds around the diameter of it, you can straighten the shaft out. And I was able to get this shaft within 1/1000th of run out, which was completely within spec of how much play there is in the bearings. Let's see, rack stop. This is the factory stop in the rack. It's just a heavy piece of steel that slides in there that gets the ring rolled into it to keep the rack from being able to come out. I replaced it in aluminum, you know, ounces here, ounces there, anything to try to break even on the rack weight. Pinion housing. I've already showed you the pinion housing. I've replaced all the hardware that I could in titanium. So these are the tie rod end nuts that thread onto here. They go out to the tie rods, and then these are the titanium bolts for the bolt the housing there. So titanium hardware. I already showed you the brackets. Let me scoot some of this stuff out of my way. I want to show you the difference between a manual. When you convert from manual to power, if you're going to go from the manual rack to the power steering rack, you have to be sure to get the link to match. So this is a power steering link. This is a manual link. You can see the differences. The housing piece on a manual rack is actually, the power steering rack is taller than a manual rack. So the link on a power rack is shorter. And not only that, but the spline at the end is larger on a power rack versus a manual rack. And then there's the corresponding weight differences because one is shorter than the other. That's part of how I calculated the overall weight difference between the two, as I took the whole system into account. You know, obviously I didn't include the pump or the reservoir because all that stuff was already out of my car. So there you can see the difference in the pieces. And I'm pretty sure, but from what I've seen so far, all the powers just have this purple marking. All the manuals had an orange mark and a purple mark. You know, maybe that's from factory. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there's orange under here that I can't see. But the length is obvious, and then you can tell just by looking at this part. Power steering, manual, and then the power has a larger spline. Now, as far as rack centering, when you're going from a manual to a manual car to a power steering car. In the two cars, the amount of this position is different between a manual steering car and a power steering car. Let's see if you can make this out here. So if I lay these two parts here side by side, you can see where the stop. So on the manual rack, the tie rod stops. It actually bottoms out right where the boot right where the boot goes on. In a power rack, the tie rod end actually goes up inside the housing. So the rack actually stops here. So if we center on the rack stop positions with the mount, you can see it's about a 3/4 of an inch difference in here to here. Now that's not a big deal. You know, it's going to turn farther to one side than the other. The easiest solution is whatever side you're trying to shorten, you can simply just put a collar on the rack portion itself on either end that you're trying to shorten the throw on. You know, even a piece of nylon or an aluminum, you know, take the tie rod end off or this piece end off, put a collar on here, and then that will limit how much travel the car has to the opposite side of the car. So if you're turning left, you put the stop on this side. Trying to push farther that side, you put the stop on this, or limit the travel to that side, you put the stop on this end. Hopefully that makes sense. That's really about it. I think I got everything here on my my bullet list that you see down here on my paper. I really just wanted to get all this information compiled. You can go back to the beginning of the vid, and I'll have a close-up on my chart there showing the turns between the different racks and the weight differences and the lengths and the weight removal that I've done. One other thing to note, the part of the weight, why a power steering rack is so much heavier than a manual rack, is that a power rack is only 865 thousandths on the rack itself. In a manual rack, the shaft is almost a whole 100 thousandths larger in diameter. I believe that comes out to several pounds in weight difference between the two. And also the shaft of a manual rack actually has a hole through it for fluid to pass. Hopefully I haven't created more more questions than answers. I was just trying to get all this together because now that I've made this video, I can actually put my rack back in my car. Thanks for watching, and check us out, www.huxracing.com. Thank you.